Hey everybody, how are you guys doing? I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is another talk on philosophy and European philosophy, modern, and specifically Descartes. The first, often called the first modern European philosopher. I would like to start, though, and it gets very Wittgenstein, and we'll get to Wittgenstein at the end of the course, and I'm very into Wittgenstein, and how he is going beyond what Descartes and Kant say. But I would like to start, given that I do not try to make these talks political. In fact, I try to specifically make sure these talks are for everyone. However, just because it's historical, it is political, but it's a historical thing that happened where people are talking about 2 + 2 = 4. And Ted Lieu actually says it's amazing that this starts off, this piece of legislation, with 2 + 2 = 4. And Ted Lieu, the Democratic representative, says this is great. Now... and the cats are a-scratching. Let's see yes. And the cats have something to say somewhat about all of that. What do you say, buddy? Are you upset? For cats, 2 + 2 = Nathan. You know what I mean? Because they're already 2 of something. They don't need to add up. You know? They don't really. It's hard to hurt them and thus conceptualize them physically and mentally. However, if we are adding up sets of things... Many fine people would say it's perfectly objective and rational that 2 + 2 = 4. And that's great. I happen to screw with people, of course, because I teach philosophy. So actually, I am into the Wittgensteinian idea, and it upsets people, but I think it's highly explainable, and I think it's the better, more correct answer. Hey, buddy. That 2 + 2 = 4 is a very solid human practice, and that's what a fact is. Now, I'm not going to prove that to you right now. In fact, we're going to walk through this. But it is appropriate to start with Descartes in modern European philosophy. Please watch my talks as the preface to all of this. But Descartes says, we know 2 + 2 = 4. I often say 2 + 3 = 5 is the example he gives. Not 2 + 2 = 4, funny enough, but right next door, yes, in arithmetic. And he says God would not lie to us, and thus science could not lie to us in math about 2 + 2 = 4 and 2 + 3 = 5. I spent a lot of time in European philosophy explaining Descartes' not very good argument and then explaining why a lot of modern European philosophy is a quest to discover whether or not 2 + 3 = 5 is a perfect fact in the mind of God and science, or whether or not it is an imperfect human practice. That is the range, actually, a lot of the talk about objectivity and subjectivity. I tend towards the Wittgensteinian idea that 2 + 3 = 5 and 2 + 2 = 4 is arithmetic human practices. The easiest way is to say, would a crystalline being, Tibetan salt lamps floating in space, show me what you got? Could they have alternate maths? Can we invent alternate maths? Yes. Okay, one of the things I like to say, what if we have square math? There's only 4 values, right? Like 0 and 1 are actually in binary the only, in a sense, values in extension. But they also then become other values. Technically, it's just a ton of zeros and ones. If we have 4-value math, 2 + 3 could equal 1, 0, depending on if we have 0 through 3, 1 through 4. If we have 1 through 4, 1 through 3, it's 1 in a clock, like a clock going around. Is math necessarily linear? Does it have to be? We practice arithmetic that there is a never-ending... Have you ever seen a never-ending number line? You don't need to. Are these practices? Is this absolute fact? Well, I am going to read... What I'm first going to do is read, just for a second, this opening, because we actually have 2 + 2 = 4 as part of a piece of legislation. And regardless of what you think about the presidency, what's been happening, let me just read this to you, and then I'm going to lecture on Descartes, because actually this is a really cool example, and this just popped up this morning. It says here, Ted Lieu tweeted, in the history, and I believe this is this morning, in the history of legal proceedings, in the history of legal pleadings, he says, it's funny that pleading the earth is round and 2 + 2 = 4 is pleading. That's actually true from a sort of Wittgensteinian point of view, but it's more than that, yes? In the history of legal pleadings, this is one of the best opening paragraphs ever written. And I have to say, it's kind of hilariously is, regardless of what you're going to take on this, and I don't disagree with the paragraph, which I am going to point out here, and then we're going to go on to our lecture on Descartes and the rest of our class in European philosophy. Introduction to the piece of legislation. And here I'm just going to read the very short sentences of the simple opening numeral 1 numero uno, paragraph. First sentence. The earth is round, period. 2 plus 2 equals 4, period. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the 2020 election for President and Vice President of the United States. The election was not stolen, rigged, or fixed, period. These are facts. And then the next sentence is what I want us to concentrate on. Because actually, if you believe in objective or subjective truth, you can agree that there are facts, and 2 plus 2 equals 4. Plenty. Actually, everybody agrees to this. If you think that people who believe that truth is more subjective or are on that side in philosophy don't believe that 2 plus 2 ever could equal 4, that is too easy of a red herring of a straw man knocking down your opponent's argument. You see that all the time. And if you want to turn off this talk and think I'm an idiot, great. More idiocy for me. And more facts and maths. But the problem is that still, as many fine thinkers have said, there is a debate, there is human practices where we do know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and we practice it. We also know aliens and other cultures could practice different maths, and that could work. Or at least I would say at our more honest and debating and open-minded, we do know that Captain Kirk could encounter space aliens that don't know the language of love or math. Yes, hopefully he won't teach, all that to him. Get down from there, Captain. So basically, it's like 2 plus 2 equals 4 for human beings doing regular arithmetic. But oddly, we have minds that can come up with science fiction. So why is it, and again, I haven't actually said the final thing I realized rushing through here. It says the final 2 sentences, these are facts. They are, and this is very good for a Wittgensteinian, we pragmatically live truth in our lives. The earth is round, not flat. 2 plus 2 equals 4. They are demonstrable and irrefutable, is what it says. Now, you might think demonstrable and irrefutable from a strong objective point of view means we've perfectly proved the earth is perfectly round and 2 plus 2 always perfectly equals 4, and you cannot possibly say anything against it. I am going to use this to open up the field of subjectivity-objectivity. I am more fascinated with subjectivity and objectivity, and we talk about it and you argue about things that way. Is that your opinion man or not? All day long, whether or not we're focused on this, which is what makes the earth is round and 2 plus 2 equals 4 such nice, easy, but still hard examples to debate about. And if you don't like the debate, if you just want people to never talk about it, then don't, do whatever you like. But these debates remain open whether or not you listen to them, because we have, one could say easily, the easiest way to say is we have opposing modes of mind psychologies, not entirely each individual against another individual, but we have minds that work in various ways. We have to do various practices with math and the earth, which means we know actually when we're on the earth looking at a flat map, we treat the earth as very flat. We then, in fact, most of the time we treat the earth and the ground as flat. We do not treat it as round. It is very rare you'd ever have to treat the earth as round. We often use math such that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and we expect others to use that math and no other. What does that mean? But actually the earth is not actually perfectly round. It's kind of squished, it's actually rotates so it's a little bit squished, top to bottom. It's not round perfectly, just like a line is a line, but is it a perfect line? No. Does that mean it's not a line? What happens if I add 2 and 2 and it's 4, but I didn't see that other object on the table. It turns out it was 2 plus 3 equals 5. Don't say you can never be wrong about 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is so regular we can often not be wrong with other human beings looking at apricots. It actually isn't that 2 plus 2 equals 4 always functions perfectly. And be careful here of the positivist idea, but 2 plus 2 equals 4 adds up metaphysically or deep within my mind perfectly. I'm just going to advise you, be careful of saying that deep within your mind or deep within math metaphysically, 2 plus 2 always and perfectly adds up to 4. And I'm just going to caution you here. And I'm going to say, in spite of everything I'm saying, human beings often, very much clearly not always, think the earth is round. In fact, more people think 2 plus 2 equals 4. I think flat earthers very much agree to that, which is odd because even though I like questioning, and I don't really question the earth is round, funny enough, I oftentimes, much more so to be hard on people, question that 2 plus 2 equals 4 or 2 plus 3 equals 5 in the ways that I am, but I can get into more. But the interesting thing here is Descartes is going to start modern European philosophy with saying, I know 2 plus 3 equals 5. God would not lie to me about that. Now, whether or not, again, I am agnostic. I do not teach philosophy to convince people that there is or isn't gods of the ancient or modern world. And I don't chase people down and try to make people not believe in math or believe in math. In fact, it's practice. So that's really not, that's kind of off the table, isn't it? Or not important. The interesting thing is to look at math simultaneously as more the positivist point of view. It's very much a duck rabbit. It is a set of rules and practices that are perfect, but in another way, it's an imperfect set of practices that can never be perfectly perception, or we could just 2 plus 2 equals 3. Damn it, I just okay. If I could suddenly make a misstep in reasoning, even with the simplest of things, in a certain sense, you understand me when I say 2 plus 2 should in our practices equal 4, but could be mistaken or not. And notice how some would say, so thus it always truly equals 4, and others would say on the other side of the duck rabbit, but it's imperfectly practiced again, right? So basically what we're going to be doing throughout the class, and I have been recording lectures on logic, you are welcome to view those as well, but in the modern European class for which this lecture is, we are going to be covering this kind of thing, whether or not 2 plus 3 equals 5, in many ways, simple ways that are often those different sides of the duck rabbit, actually, subjectivity, objectivity, and different strategies of that, because I truly believe that while you may think me an idiot or not, we do live in a culture where certainly we want to agree the earth is round and 2 plus 2 equals 4, but not only are there, of course, disagreements and disagreeers we'd call just plenty wrong, or wrong period, and then just not talk to them, but we also have trouble it's problem because the earth is not perfectly round and we don't perfectly practice even simplest math like 2 plus 2 equals 4. So what's going on all of there? I am not actually closing this one way or the other, or saying certainly it is one way or the other. And notice I'm actually not talking about the election so much. I'm actually focusing on 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then the final phrase here again, they are demonstrable. We can repeatedly show that 2 plus 2 again and again equals 4. And if we are in that math, rather than square math or circular math with 3 values or triangular math or any other practice we want to do and share with others, and then know whatever we know as we do it. If we agree to share linear math with others, and we agree and we practice it that there's a never-ending number line we never see, and quantities just kind of add up 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, which we can't, in a certain sense, practice right in front of ourselves, it is very irrefutable that 2 plus 2 could equal anything other than 4. But what that actually means is as you demonstrate it and show it, you cannot do very much otherwise. It doesn't actually say you can't do anything otherwise. And technically, alternate maths would be specifically otherwise. But if you could it is very, very hard to make a mistake. It's very, very hard to show or get your fellow human beings to agree with anything once we're in 2 plus 2 equals something like 4 to anything other than 2 plus 3 equals 5. Now that actually is very much the way that I want to describe it. And before you say no numbers have always been real, think that maybe number words and practices of 2 and 3, if you read Don't Sleep There Are Snakes, which I love to bring up all the time, we may have had number words as human beings very recently. How many number words, of course I'm using 2 plus 2 equals 4. Other than that, how many number words or quantities am I using to convince you of anything here? You're reasoning with me, right? It's not irrefutable mathematical reasoning. Certainly somebody who doesn't like what I'm saying would say no. But you're reasoning with me, and I'm not using many quantities. So am I using certain agreeable factual reasoning or not? It's not very easy to say completely, is it? Yeah, of course, if you hate what I'm saying, I'm just an idiot. Next video. But here again, I love these sides of this. I very much enjoy lecturing and going on and on and on. So what we're going to do here is, given that the earth is round, it's again, in this opening legislation, the earth is round, 2 plus 2 equals 4. These are facts. In fact, I would say yes. What we call facts are very, very highly agreeable practices like that. And they are demonstrable given the practices, and Wittgenstein would agree, they are very quite irrefutable. But as Wittgenstein says, but this problem remains, as he says, hard as granite. Meaning we're really, there's something here, if you're paying attention and if you like what I'm saying from both sides, kind of, there's a problem here that is very difficult. I truly believe that Wittgenstein is a break forward, and many do in American philosophy, but many, the people I learned from, Sluga, Stroud, and others at Berkeley, you see, Sort of say, yeah, and analytic philosophy is having trouble getting this, and it has for a couple decades, and people still squabble about it. So the interesting thing in philosophy that can actually help you in life and help you argue and think is very much focusing on something like 2 + 2 = 4. I agree with Wittgenstein and you that it's a fact, but what does that mean? What does it mean that 2 + 2 = 4 is a fact? Does that mean it's a rule? Does that mean God told us that and God can't lie about it? Which is very much the Mutazilites of Islam. The Mutazilites of Islam, who are the rationalists of Islam before Descartes, and I am going to mention them here, they actually argue God is so reason and perfect, God cannot contradict God's self, such that God has to make 2 + 3 = 5 and couldn't do otherwise. Now, Sufi mystics of Islam would find this, of course, and did, very kind of awful to think, because it makes, but that's very rationalist and deist of people, Europeans, very much who are doing calculus out of algebra. God is kind of pure reasoning or math very much also, as much as a religious thing. And they are handling all that as religion and sciences are all working together and then apart, and then we have, more movements of more modernity, institutions, divisions. Specialization has happened continuously since Sumer more and more in human society. So now we have this, and people think religion's something else. 2 + 2 = 4 is scientific, but many people, many peasants who know any math at all would very much agree 2 + 2 = 4, but they might have trouble, as we said with the Georgians in the logic lectures, with 15 cats means what in a wheelbarrow. But they would often say, well, yeah, if somebody gives me $2, I now have $4 unless I lose one. But we're highly trained in math classes, unlike Georgian peasants. So in a certain sense, we are trained to demonstrate and snap into this math, and also to say something like the Earth is round. Okay, yes, it's kind of squished, whatever, but roundish, yes, it's not flat. Of course, the Earth is round means very much not that it's perfectly round, but that it is not flat. And many cultures, including the Greeks, many of them, thought the Earth was decently a disk. It's possible Pythagoras definitely thought the Earth and other things were decently disks, and others did. So if that's the case, Pythagoras and others would have thought the Earth is a flat disk versus the Earth is round. Neither need it be perfectly flat nor round. That, again, is interesting, and the ways of talking through it. And then actually the rest of the legal proceeding goes on to say the defendants have known these facts. In other words, what they're accusing the other side of doing in this, and I'm not going to make this political or follow this or try to, but I just brought this up because, yeah. And I'm not honestly trying to grind this in or be like, yes, liberals. It's like, I have my, it's the Democratic Party. Hooray for everyone. It's basically, yeah. What they are saying, though, is that human beings often agree to the Earth is round, such that if I walk up in front of you and tell you the Earth is flat, it's very possible I'm lying to you, because I do believe not that the Earth is flat, but that it is round. We do share language and stuff exactly like that. And we do come to agreements, and we share them. Here again, that is where the magic happens, yes? So let's get to Descartes. Again, thank you for allowing me this intro. But that actually itself, because Descartes says God wouldn't lie to me about 2 + 3 = 5, it is awesome to say Ted Lewis saying this is some of the best legislation in history. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. Them's facts. Doesn't say God's telling us that directly, can't lie to us. Funny enough, it doesn't even say science or math tell us that. It's just like those things there on the page. That's a fact. I don't dispute it. It just then stretches a little bit and it kicks the can down the road towards what's a fact then? Is it a practice imperfect? Or is it an airtight rule of mind or world or metaphysics? Where is it? Very good questions to ask in the simplest language. So Rene Descartes, not Descartes, although again that would be an awesome name, lived from 1596 to 1650. Now that means, again, Europeans are seeing the Islamic world and the Ottomans, they're seeing more gold and power come their way between 1600 and 1700, such that Descartes died, and he is right around the time as Newton. I think Newton lived in slight years, just shifted slightly with and after Descartes, overlapping. That the first great modern European philosopher, who is decently Greek and Aristotelian and Platonic, but he is a break from that, which is why he's not just a medieval philosopher of Europe who's doing Aristotelianism or Neoplatonism, which I also know about and like to talk about. But he is clearly starting something more like modern French and modern European philosophy. We can break philosophy into Greek, ancient Greek, and then medieval European, medieval Islamic is also going on, highly influential into that, and all of that. And then we have modern French, German, British, and all of that together, modern French, German, British, as you see it organized on my website. I've tried to make it now, because I'm cultures of language and thought and French philosophy, can be referred to altogether as Western, modern, European, Western European philosophy. The Eastern Europeans, notice, are very ignored. They call themselves Central Europeans. Many call them Eastern Europeans and ignore them. This is the money and the power. France and Germany and Britain remain some of the wealthiest, along with America, nations in the world. And this is the start of their golden ages. We're still somewhat in them, of the money and the power. And this is the start of major French philosophy, which is the start of major European philosophy. Descartes is famous for his discourse on method and his meditations. He is also in mathematics known for his Cartesian coordinate system, which is creating a visual, like Mandelbrot was one of the first to do math with computer screens, and he showed fractals, which couldn't visually exist as math before computer screens, and then they do. The basics did. The ways of doing it did. The fractals of fractal in the Mandelbrot set did not without the computer screen. Similarly, Descartes is actually using paper to graph out x and y, and Muslims did something like that, but he presents one variable against another visually, and with precedence, then that becomes an excellent visual device for adding to math as something that's not purely numbers, but is a visual device for visual display that then allows better facilitation of math, like the computer screen for Mandelbrot. This was critical for Newton and Leibniz, then continuing to develop algebra into the Latin calculus, by name. So the word Cartesian is used rather than Descartesian. If somebody is Descartes-like, they are Cartesian. So it is the Cartesian coordinate system, not the Descartesian coordinate system. That is just sort of interesting, facet of language there. So Descartes was born in Touraine, France, a town which has since been renamed Descartes after its most famous citizen. Descartes' father was a member of parliament, though his mother died when he was very young. It is odd, like Bambi, how many philosophers lose a parent very early on, and how many are in warring states periods, or periods where great empires are on a decline. Why? Because things are shaken up and they have to ask questions about things like facts, science, and 2 + 2 = 4, the Catholic Church. And they don't ask as many questions and are not supported by people in asking as many questions until new answers are somewhat wanted and supported, which is times of tragedy. And again, personal tragedy in one's life, like losing a parent, that's Plato, that's Descartes, that's Confucius, that's a lot of major thinkers in the world, oddly enough. Descartes' father was a member of parliament, though his mother died when he was very young. He went to law school to follow his father and become a merchant, but decided to become a mercenary instead and fight in the 30 Years' War to seek truth, which he possibly didn't find in law school. As a soldier, he had much... I always love the Simpsons joke where the bully joins the militia and he's with Homer and they're with the Neighborhood Watch militia group, and then all that goes to heck, and he's like, and he throws down the sack of doorknobs and he's like, I don't believe in anything anymore, man. I'm going to law school. And Homer's like, no! It's yes, truth. You fool. Again, Ted Lieu is hopefully somewhat truthful, or believes he is, and he probably went to law school. I'd have to check, but I'm pretty sure, or likely, with being a major Democrat. But hey, so as a soldier, Descartes had a lot of time waiting for battle, and he studied mathematics and science in his spare time. On the night of November 10th, 1619, that was a while ago. Again, that's 400-ish years plus 2 ago. Descartes had a series of visions. Possibly he was malnourished or ate something weird. That the world is a rational and mechanical system, a Newtonian clock, as people say. So Isaac Newton and Descartes think the world is a mechanical algebraic clock after Muslims and Mutazilites. And many think the world is clock-like, algebraic, mathematical. That is a very useful, some may say a little too useful, if we're deforesting places, way of seeing the world. Not necessarily that the world is mechanical is evil intent or misuses resources, but the world is very much a clock of algebra and math, and we can mechanically use it, is very much a start of a lot of rationalism. And that is true in many ways. Could be metaphorical, though, or only somewhat true. So before Europe received, again, a bunch of basic mechanics from China and algebra from Muslims, which hopefully you have watched those talks, Descartes would have little reason to view nature as a mathematical machine. And I did mention the It's a Small World clock is modeled on German and Swiss clocks of dancing figures, which is modeled on Islamic and Chinese automata, and people do and show that and demonstrate it. So if we see mechanical people dancing out, and there was I think a Swiss guy designed a mechanical chess-playing Turk kind of, sort of like the movie Big with the creepy, psychic thing. It was the 80s. Basically, of course, there's mechanical people, and so Descartes is thinking we kind of have a mechanical body like a mechanical automata or robot. And we're going to get to that with all of this, because he is thinking that, and we do still think in those ways, plenty. This is also Islamic and Chinese ways of thinking a bit, and they're not entirely how we or other cultures think, but you can see that that's the technology rooting in. I oftentimes, of course, I'm discouraging you from thinking this is just a Western scientific way that snapped in. The technology all over the world had built up such that the Europeans are seeing things more as algebra and clocks. That's not a new mind state as much as a new living arrangements coming into town and then flourishing. At first, Descartes intended on writing a book on physics, his treatise on the world. But in 1633, Galileo was condemned by the Catholic Church for his theory that the Earth moves around the Sun, a theory that posits the Sun at the center of the solar system, which is actually wrong, and the universe, it's less wronger, and the universe instead of the Earth. Because of Galileo's troubles, Descartes decided to publish his discourse on method instead, so he switched from physics to philosophy, and it is today considered the first major work of modern European philosophy. This caution, unfortunately, did not spare Descartes, as the work was condemned by the Pope in 1663, 30 years after Galileo's work was condemned and after Descartes' death, and it was put on the prohibited index of books, which is a famous thing, alongside many others that are foundational for the European Enlightenment. The Catholic Church, I'll get to this in a second with Feyerabend's two-sided views on this. Even though Descartes, like Aquinas, argued that reason teaches us that the Catholic Church is the one true religion, and he's like, God wouldn't lie to us about 2 + 3 = 5, or Catholicism. So actually Descartes is like, God wouldn't lie to us about science, math, or religion equally. What Descartes means is that we know rationally there is Christian morality and there's math. Both regularly work. Think about that. I often point out, because secular math is real. But remember, the first people to do this thought rationally Christian morality is also just as airtight. And it's rule-based. So be careful before you say, this is the dawn of, not only do people have math before this, but Descartes very much believes religion and science are both objective and rational. He's not just taking science over religion. He's saying institutions don't lie to us because God stands behind the church and science and math and created a mathematical world. And that's what Newton believed too. And Newton actually says God pokes his finger in to keep the solar system going occasionally because it would spin out. So Newton is not, turning to math as an atheist. Newton thinks the world's a clock because it's intelligently designed. You can think whatever you want. Most of these thinkers thought the world is mathematical because it is intended and designed that way. It is very clear Descartes thinks that. Hume questions all this, but Descartes isn't. He thinks math is real because God is real because the church is real. And again, Christian morality. You and I can have views about that, but that is history. So be careful about saying, and then Europeans popped into pure math and that got rid of religion, because that's very much not, or we chose science over religion. It's, again, in this culture rather than another. Again, think more the Mutazilites of Islam a bit. So, as I like to point out, I highly recommend the book Against Method by Feyerabend. I do like that book. Some people hate him. But Feyerabend is very much a post-Wittgensteinian kind of, these are just practices, and we have amazing minds that come up with maths. That's great. It is. And the Catholic Church. It's amazing. It's history. But, without loving or hating math or the Catholic Church entirely here, I'm not a religious person. I grew up kind of half Catholic. My mother is liberal progressive Catholic. And I am happy she is, and I'm fine with that. It's great. People can be people. It's wonderful. She's happy with me. I'm happy with her. It's all good. But as the skeptical philosopher of science Feyerabend notes, the church did not merely stand for ignorance, but it was the university system of the time. So, as he says, it really is more in accord with the facts, ma'am, and science and history, and being factually correct here. To say the church did not say, we don't like math, we don't like science, go away intelligence, that is a complete... We do live in Protestant land a bit. Protestants tend to represent, and the Anglophonic world is very Protestant. The Catholic time was stupid time. Well, yes and no, as the pirate says, you know? The Catholic Church was science. They were math. They created Notre Dame, right? They built it with engineers in 1200, 1100. Now we burn the, and I guess we teared the roof off the sucker. The roof is or was on fire, much love. And sorry for the, it wasn't me, but sorry for the property destruction, you know what I mean? With all of the, with the facts of nature. So, as the church was concerned, it was the work of Descartes and Galileo that was in conflict with reason and experience already acquired. Because actually, again, if you get into Hinduism they have logicians and they tell you there's testimony, and there is. In a court of law, I go in there, I say, well, the guy did this. Then the jury convicts somebody based on that or not. And that's a problem and interwoven with other evidence. The church would have considered the books of the Bible to be witness testimony. That is what they explicitly say they are. Now, you and I can say, well, I don't know about that. They would have taken all that as solid evidence and very sacred, you know what I mean, and particular evidence. So anything that conflicts with evidence should be somewhat questioned and or whatever. Now, you and I, of course, can say, well, in hindsight, but again, think about all the people sitting in the church and doing their culture. What can they see and not see? You know what I mean? While they're building Notre Dame, it looks like they are the new thing in town. They're better than Muslims at doing a bunch of stuff increasingly. So this is God and math and science and productivity. They're not going to say, well, this is math being productive, unlike the church and Notre Dame. That doesn't make any sense. So if you say to yourself, the church stood for ignorance against math, you are misrepresenting that. You can believe whatever you want again. And in fact, I'm a non-religious person. Some people really don't like religion. I highly discourage people from hating religion enough they don't see it operative throughout human history, because you're not going to get the history of science that way. This is very Feyerabend, and it's very valuable to bring up here. There are people who really don't like this, but then again, I really like pushing the Wittgenstein and Feyerabend a bit, because it really is anthropological history. You can believe whatever you want about pure morals and math, but there is history, and it definitely makes us look human, and it's not that the Catholic Church loved or hated scientia in the Latin. They were. Who did more convincing of people that Galileo and Descartes have scientia in their lives other than the Catholic Church using the word scientia to mean there's all the scientias, the sciences, and then there's philosophy and theology as the queen and king sciences on top. You say, oh, but they got that all wrong. Sure. You know what I mean? But they use their words the way we often use them a bit, and then we still use the words plenty the way they used them. So again, don't say to yourself the Catholic Church hated science. They were opposed to get what Galileo discovered, and it turned out he was more so not entirely right. And is that, as Feyerabend says, because he had a brilliant brain? Yes, and it's also because telescopes were coming along from Islam and lenses and things like that. And he looked at things, he looked past things on the moon he couldn't explain, and he pointed out a thing or two that he could. He did not explain everything or see everything objectively. He looked through a telescope, he came up with better things. That is awesome. He deserves his place in history. He's great. Muslims should be in spell check, of course, the great ones, as should Chinese thinkers. But Galileo's awesome, okay? He is. In historical context, he's a human being fighting for a different, in a sense, scientific, better theory, and the institutions, like they still did, and they did to Darwin, they say, no, you must be wrong, we don't like you. You can debate again how open-minded we are towards new ideas with all of our institutions today, and again, this does get into the backs and forths of whether or not we want to agree or disagree on 2 plus 3 and 2 equals 4 and 5 and what have you, right? I switched that up there. So Descartes' death is famous. We're going to spend another moment here on his life, and then we'll get to his thinking. Descartes' death is famously and unfortunately kind of funny. Again, thankfully, Epicurus says death is nothing to us. Hopefully this doesn't upset him, He's in a better place or not. So for the majority of his life, he worked in bed until noon each day, an aristocrat who had the time and leisure to do this. And of course, science and math would be done by rich guys a lot and in bed, or on a table, while they don't have to work. Aristotle says you want to do philosophy, you shouldn't have a job. Hooray, that's what today is, Because basically, of course, you need to be wealthy enough to just think, and if you're corrupted by money, he says, Aristotle says the rich aren't corrupted by money, they don't need it. He's completely correct about that, right? That's this economy. That's when you can do philosophy. If you're wealthy enough, you sit around in bed each day, then you're unbiased in science and philosophy because you're not like a peasant needing money. is actually what Aristotle says. So that's very Descartes. He's sitting around in bed. Clearly he's unbiased, with the satin pillows. So after he became famous and his works were prohibited by the Catholic Church, the Protestant Queen Christina of Sweden, power move, she's like, I'm Protestant. I like people the Catholic Church hates, right? She invites him to Stockholm to be her private tutor. There is a good painting of Descartes pointing at things. She's like, all right, and I have that in the notes. Unfortunately for Descartes, she wanted lessons each and every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, and apparently there's a lot of snow in Stockholm a ton of the time. Between the snow and the early mornings, Descartes was soon sick with pneumonia and died. So don't, again, stay in bed until noon. Safely do philosophy is what this means for all of us, yes? I've been waking up way too early. I have cats, so I just hit the sack in the bed plenty early each evening, I don't need to meet people right now. So it is similar, oddly, to Sir Francis Bacon's famous death, which is from the 1500s, around the same time, a little bit earlier, I believe, than Newton and Descartes, and then also a little earlier than Descartes. I don't have the dates right here. Catching pneumonia after he repeatedly was stuffing snow into chickens to try to preserve the meat with early refrigeration, practices and keep it from rotting. Which people already then knew you could pack things in ice, and then it wouldn't rot as fast, and they didn't have the refrigerator, and unfortunately he caught pneumonia and died from all that. Much love, and again, to Madame Curie and anyone else, you know what I mean? Getting slowly radioactive, or quickly. I'm not sure of the half-lives. So, some Swedes reported that Descartes was killed with a poison communion wafer. It seems like a Protestant lie to me, being from the half-Catholic. It's given to him by a priest, but the sources on this are questionable, and of course this sounds like a story the Protestants would say they didn't kill Descartes, accidentally with the snow. And the early mornings, no, a Catholic killed him off because they didn't want to move, because it's like, you're not going to help the Protestants, mwahaha, intrigue, Again, I blame the Jesuits for everything, long before the Jesuits existed, because I'm an internet conspiracy imbecile. So, Descartes' philosophical writings, particularly the Meditations, drew the reactions of several philosophers who themselves went on to become famous, particularly Spinoza, Hobbes, Hume, Leibniz, and Locke. In this class, we don't cover Hobbes, for whom the cartoon tiger is named. That is because Hobbes is actually more of a social political philosopher. Hobbes actually wanted to start I have notes on Hobbes and I cover him. He wanted to create a whole Newtonian mechanics that actually works rocks all the way up to politics. Very much like Saint-Simon wanted sociology to be the most objective and queen of the sciences. And the top piece, which did not happen really. In fact, people don't consider sociology the most objective and crowning of the sciences at all today. But you can see why Saint-Simon, who wanted the socialism, actually does want sociology to become something like a more objective, helpful science, clearly, and public, and used for public good. Hobbes more wants to work rocks all the way up to politics. We don't really cover that. In this class, we are going to cover next Spinoza, then Hume, Locke, then Hume, then Leibniz is what we're going to do, and then Kant. In the Meditations, Descartes asks, what can we know for certain if it is possible that everything is an illusion of the mind? Like Avicenna, I already covered, Descartes concludes that we can be certain that we are aware and conscious. From this, he proceeds to conclude that we can be certain that our thoughts are our own, and that there is a good and loving monotheistic God who would not deceive us about these things. He comes to this very quickly. Many criticize him for this, who also believe in God, who are like, you just sort of quickly said God means math and science are real. I don't think this is good enough. Famously, Descartes is a first thinker. He does some good work, but he leaves certain problems open. Then rationalists following Descartes will support Descartes, but say he doesn't really come up with good arguments for why we know fact A, fact B, and fact C. Against this, the empiricists, the British empiricists, Locke, Berkeley, for whom this town is misnamed, and Leibniz, although this does they're also idealists and not, Berkeley is, the camps overlap, that they are saying actually it's empirical and we gather things from experience, we don't have pure principles. We're going to slowly walk through that as we get to that. But I do mention here, Descartes tries to come up with a proto-rationalist argument as the first rationalist that I can deduce that God is real, therefore 2 + 3 = 5, and science isn't lying to me, and neither is the Catholic Church with a bunch of morality and principles. But Many thinkers after him either believe him and want to give better arguments and are rationalists, or, which is the more objective side of truth, or they go empiricists, say we really only have induction and we really only know things from example A, example B, human practices as math, as I already mentioned, and they go more so from the, not entirely, but more so from the subjectivist empirical side. That gets mixed up. In fact, Locke very much believes in separating objective from subjective truth, but I will get to that with Locke, and we're not going to talk that out entirely right now. But the two sides of this debate became known as rationalism and empiricism, and that is the first major split of modern European philosophy. Do we like Descartes? 2 + 3 = 5 is always a fact. We know that perfectly, and God wouldn't lie, science doesn't lie, that's airtight, we now bank that forever. Or, whether or not it's God or science or math that tell us that, is 2 + 3 = 5 an inductive, continuous, imperfect human practice? That's already the split. Hegel sees this and he says that is the split throughout human history in the 1800s. People are more objectivist, subjectivist kind of. And we see this in European thought. And he says we see this in Greek thought. Unfortunately, Hegel did not give Indians any credit and he ignores the Chinese. And I always mention, it isn't that this is a waltz step perfectly, but you do see similar concerns and backs and forths and camps in Indian and Chinese thought. And unfortunately, Hegel in the 1800s was not at a time when he could have appreciated it as much as we do today. So we actually see, through this kind of objective and collective, we kind of have our different practices, is a very major split between, I would say, Confucians and Taoists, between Indian Nihilologicians and the Buddhists and Jains. I shamelessly use these concepts in other areas of thought because I do truly believe you can see sort of the communal versus the personal and all of those interrelated things, and communal versus different practices. You can see that, and the tensions involved. And I'm not giving you, you are welcome to have oppositional answers of your own, to this and that on that. That is what I'm trying to lead you to do in your papers. So if you want to express anything about this against or for me or Descartes or I would, Descartes or, put this in your paper. Start writing down these thoughts. If this is ticking you off or making you excited, start writing your thoughts down. Rework them, and turn them into a somewhat 4-page paper, as I am, and take your time and work on it, as I am talking about Descartes, and then Spinoza, and then Locke and Hume. That's what you should be doing. Take your time, again, write something you want to write and rewrite it, and it won't be perfect. Maybe you won't give the final answer for yourself or others, but at least write something decent and get something down and out there. That's what I'm encouraging you to do, to work through your thoughts on this. I find that quite valuable, and even if you come to completely opposite conclusions from me, the experience thus will be valuable for you and I. Yes, it's working through the mechanics and doing the exercises. In a world of increasing algebra and mechanics, Descartes turns from an ancient understanding of cause up in the heavens above, acquired through centuries of charting the stars and seasons, causation and order used to be above the watery mortal world below, to an understanding of actually now cause is actually mechanical down here. And Descartes actually sort of makes the upper world kind of, it's sort of like, well, soul and spirit and God is kind of, that's the cause of the math, but the real workings of the math is down here. Now that actually is a bit different from, it is very Mutazilite, but it's actually not a lot of ancient world would say the math, and the Greeks would much more like Plato and Aristotle say the pure math is more above the lunar sphere and the stars. And then actually all down here is not so, mud and hair don't really have so much form for Plato. For Descartes, notice mud and hair would be sort of mathematical, mechanical, and then the soul and the spirit is kind of mind above the dead mechanical automata. For Plato, mud and hair don't really have a form very much. So actually the math for Plato is above this shadowy world. For Descartes, he's actually, oddly enough, while supporting the soul and the mind and the God, he very much verbally and quite explicitly, and trying not to get killed off by a poison wafer or otherwise, yes, or Protestants, as that's a thing, is that the math is actually down here now with algebra. Notice the Muslims have algebra down here. The Mutazilites are, yes, God's above, but this is reasoning of God down here. And so you have the Newtonian mechanics, and they're mechanical down here. And the mechanics actually, that's sort of now the mind and consciousness, which is kind of the soul is kind of not mathematical per se. It's kind of sort of the over thing that causes the math. That is a very interesting switch that's going on here. And I do like pointing that out. This isn't that Descartes then switches us completely, or a culture completely, into that way of thinking, but he is pushing that sort of more, the world down here is the math, and then the consciousness or mind is kind of above or beyond all of that with that. He is changing it around that way. It's interesting to ponder, and that, in China and Islam, what would you see as the world fills full of devices and mechanics? You would see something like more of a picture, often, not necessarily, but often something like that, and human beings talking for and against those points of view. So, in fact, this was somewhat condemned by others for saying that the world is very mechanical. Descartes argues that the natural world, including animals and human bodies, are mechanical and unconscious. So actually he's saying that, like, my cat and this arm are very mechanical and then full of soul or not. And he doesn't think the cats, sadly. So for Descartes is very famously, and people say, a dualist. There is a word, the words Cartesian Dualism. What that means is, for Descartes, the mind and body are separate, fully separate realms. We're going to get with Leibniz, how are they spun up and coordinated together? But essentially, there is your soul and your experience and your mind, whatever all this is, such that I am having an experience. That is in a separate soul realm, which is immaterial. Then you have the material clock-like algebraic world below, and that is fully separate mind and body, and then I kind of have a soul hanging out in here. Descartes sort of does say it touches the pituitary gland, but it couldn't touch it. And Leibniz has to deal with these sorts of problems, actually. But part of the worst of this, and not to demonize Descartes unfortunately was into anatomy, which does mean cutting up animals and people. And unfortunately, Descartes did argue that he does not think that he thinks that animals actually don't have souls, and that they are effectively robots, and they look like they exhibit pain, but it's okay if a dog looks like it yelps, and because they don't actually feel or aren't conscious. He actually does argue this. That is sad. PETA would be deeply pissed. Sadly, he does, and again, I'm a little hippie sad, post-hippie sad about that, but he actually is thus committed somewhat to the position that if dogs don't have souls, then they're sort of clock-like robot beings that don't really have any feeling at all. Sad but true, he does. And of course, I have had more than one student in Berkeley write a long paper about that, of course. It's an easy paper to write. Sometimes it doesn't have to be. It could be as intelligent and amazing a paper as possible. There's an easy reaction piece to the editor to do here, of course. So, which again, he does think that thoughts and concepts come from God, including math and science. And that would be why cats and dogs just don't use words and don't have concepts or consciousness. And many would say cats. Again, what do you think, buddy? There he is. Let's give him a little bit of a rub. Good boy. Yeah, you are such a good cat. Anyway, I choose, of course, to treat my cats as if they are semi-conscious beings, and they do the same to me. And that is all I deserve, yes? So, yes. So, in the Meditations, Descartes lays out the famous Deceiving Demon. It's very similar to Avicenna's Floating Man, as already described. He says, I won't tell you about my first thoughts as I was sitting around the campfire because, quote, they are so abstract and unusual, they will probably not be to the taste of everyone. Which here, of course, in sort of more kind of medieval time conception, probably he's thinking like that our souls are or aren't. He is not necessarily, hopefully, thinking about, well, far more interesting parties, or visual visions as, more folks might suspect. He could have together, wow, keep that to yourself. Again, Descartes says we all accept things we believe to be certain, but sometimes these turn out to be wrong. Therefore, we cannot use certainty as the sole criterion for truth. We have to separate out the categorically certain from the seemingly certain. Now, that's going to be something to talk out here. The categorically certain is 2 + 2 = 4 and 2 + 2 = 5 certain because they are categorical. And what is that? Descartes says it seems certain that he is sitting by the fire writing, but we can doubt this because he could be dreaming. Ancient people in India, Greece, and China all say this could be a dream, therefore what is real? That is common in human affairs, no matter what they thought of dreams. Because, of course, somebody could dream somebody does something, they wake up, everybody's like, no, they didn't. So what was that? It just happened, and people have different cultural ideas. Descartes uses the example of madmen who think they are kings or that their bodies are made of glass. Now, funny enough, Descartes has familiarity with madness and delusions as Avicenna, and Descartes is kindly saying something that many people in France would know what he's saying, but he's saying it very politely. King Charles VI, also known as Charles the Mad, who happens to be a king and mad, they could be king. They could think they're kings. Well, this guy actually was a king. He didn't just think he's a king. That would be rational. You know what I mean? That'd be lucid. That he was known as Charles the Mad. He ruled France until 1422. He would sometimes forget his own name and run through his castle believing himself to be a wolf. Hooray for inbreeding. Also, he was afraid of being touched by others, fearing that he was made of glass. Much love to everybody and their mental problems. When Descartes says that his audience is familiar with instances of insanity, such as people believing they are made of glass, he is actually referring to Charles, the Sixth, and people would know that in France, and he doesn't have to say something, an inconvenient truth, because he's able to tell everybody and they get where he's going with it, right? Let's leave in the cat. Yes, we're trying to, the cat is, whether or not the cats are categorical. I do like to say, Kant's amazing trained cats, but we'll get to all of that. So, we already covered Avicenna's thought experiment. I do like to mention, interestingly enough, Descartes is writing in the late 1600s, 200 years after the Cathars, a Gnostic and Manichaean heresy that was being persecuted by the church and their royal patrons in France in the 1400s. In the early development of Christianity, there were many competing schools with different interpretations of the life and teachings of Jesus. When the Roman Emperor Constantine, I just did Ashoka, the Indian Constantine of Buddhism, called the Council of Nicaea in 325, the Catholic Church knows the Nicene Creed, which includes begotten, not made, which means Jesus was created outside of time, as I mentioned with Greek philosophy, which means he can be co-contemporary. And that actually is ancient Greek philosophy, lots of interesting stuff. If gods are born, then they can die. So technically Jesus has to be born kind of outside of time, so he will not die along with God. And that's begotten, not made in the Nicene Creed, I believe. I'm a lapse, if I'm getting my points right. There were some Christians, known as Gnostics, who argue that this world is ruled by Satan, who pretends to be God in the Old Testament. And we must break out of this deceptive dream, break on through to the other side, children. Constantine and the church declared this heretical, arguing that the Old Testament is legitimate, they kept the Old Testament, and that the world is ruled by God and administered by the church. The Gnostics, expelled as heretics, likely saw the church as a tool of Satan and a cathedral of lies. There is enough in the Bible and Christianity to say the institutions, the Catholic Church, the government, are evil, and there is enough in the same work to say, actually, this world is ruled by God, not entirely by Satan, and we can trust institutions as legit. Of course there would be, because actually Jews and Christians and others who wrote those books have been in both positions in Babylon and otherwise. In fact, famously, if you've ever heard any reggae songs, Jews in the books of the prophets say we're out of Babylon, Babylon's oppressive, then Nebuchadnezzar is replaced by Cyrus, and they're like, you know what, we're going to hang out, we're going to stay. So funny enough, there's a lot of lyrics in the lyrics potentially, and we're going to break out of Babylon. Babylon's the evil system. You can use that for all sorts of evil systems. And then actually when there's a changing of the guard, well, actually this is also, and just did, pretty cool. So actually, funny enough, Jews didn't all break out of Babylon and go away. Actually, once there was a changing of the guard, they celebrated and stayed, So that's funny because, of course, much love to reggae and all the lyrics, and it perfectly works as far as critiquing institutions, yes. But actually, they didn't completely, chant down Babylon. They changed Babylon around and then hung out, which is, again, much love to everybody. And all these truths work in wonderful ways, don't they? That doesn't tell you anything about the current situation of Rastafarians entirely. So one branch of Gnosticism was Manichaeanism, as started by the Syrian Mani, who lived around 200 to 276, who claimed to be the final incarnation of Jesus, the Buddha Amitabha, and the third Persian Zoroastrian Sayoshant. He actually claimed to be kind of like the three magi, except he claims to be Jesus, Buddha, and the Zoroastrian Messiah, Sayoshant, who probably prefigures the Jewish Messiah and or Cyrus and or Jesus. Cyrus was hailed as a Messiah, rather than Nebuchadnezzar, as a savior, but not the one necessarily, but a Messiah savior. He is called as such because that's what the word Messiah says. So another savior who comes in Zoroastrianism, like the three Persian magi, the guys who visited Jesus, would be looking for the Sayoshant, the Messiah, the savior, which is why they're following the stars. Mani says, I'm all three of that. as one dude. Hey, triple play. And Manichaeanism spread throughout the empire in 300 CE, and the Cathars were an offshoot that survived in France up to the persecutions of the 1400s. Thus, when Descartes asks if the world is a dream, ruled by a demon, and then concludes it is not, he is entirely in line with the centuries-old Catholic doctrine against the Gnostics and Cathars. I am getting this from my readings of philosophy. Other people have supplied, of course, sides of this idea, and people have been somewhat into this, and then people often don't point this out about Descartes. Technically, of course, he's a guy of his culture, of his time. He's actually saying things that are very in line with the Catholic Church, as he bends over backwards to say, and then moves to Sweden, And then the wafer gets him, Wafer's like, in spirit. So for Descartes, we can know certain truth in the name of both science and religion, because it's not Gnosticism. Otherwise, Satan is the lie of the church and religion and science, and we need to break through that in our bodies and math to get to God and the other side. So, Descartes says there do seem to be universal truths like 2 plus 3 equals 5 or a square has 4 sides. Notice how close those examples are. They're both numerical. What if, again, human beings actually use numbers recently? So where are truths other than mathematical truths, and why is quantity so dang truthful? Is another question just ask yourself here, and then we're going to continue and keep asking yourself that kind of thing. Because it's good for you, not because I want to steer your mind one way or the other. I want to open it both ways, very much. So Descartes says we can even imagine very matrix. This is very core to the matrix, and whoa, I know Kung Fu all of a sudden. So we imagine there could be a deceiving demon or a mad scientist. He says a man of great industry. It is very popular, and it was, and we'll get to Locke switching your brain or mind around in modern thought experiments very soon. It is more the modern philosophy class to say a mad scientist pokes your brain with knitting needles electrified and convinces you that you're in Descartes' life or in a cave or whatever have you. And so, of course, a deceiving demon is no longer as popular as Satan, the Gnostic sort of god of this world versus breaking beyond evil god, etc. for Gnostics to real God. Real math? Not sure. But with all that, he says a man of industry, and many have said a mad scientist, and of course it's more popular to say something, and what's the mad scientist or the computer, mad computer, other than the Matrix? The Matrix is now the man of industry, the mad scientist, which becomes, for the Wachowski sisters, was brothers, siblings, now sisters, the Matrix. So Descartes argues we are not in the power of something that completely lies to us. He says, because I think, therefore I am conscious, therefore I'm not lied to completely, therefore he just quickly assumes, so therefore the most regular things in the world, and that is unfortunately his not too great argument, as many who support him even say, the rationalists. He says, therefore, I'm just going to assume the most real regular things like math and 2 plus 3 equals 5 are real. Therefore, those aren't lies. Those are true. He does not go through mechanics or practices. You could ask how many mechanics can you go through to get 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? Notice I didn't even say that one. Prove 1 plus 1 equals 2. Or use it. He doesn't do that. Neither do you, one might say. You demonstrate it, you use it. So he actually just says, so 2 plus 3 wouldn't be a lie, neither would science unite. That's not good enough, but it is the start of modern philosophy. Unfortunately, it is not. I don't know a lot of Cartesians. Zizek actually has a cool book where he's like, and he's not a Cartesian, where he's like, I'm going to say what Descartes said that's cool because he's a countercultural thinker. He's like, I'm going to stick up for Descartes. Zizek knows very well most people are not Cartesians, even people who hate Zizek and don't like his philosophy. So it's cool to stick up for Descartes and say what he actually got right. And this is actually cool. But actually most people are not Cartesians. They go on to be Kantians or post-Hegelians, which we haven't had any of that. We will go on to. Very few people, I think, are proper Cartesians. I'm happy to meet one, happy to talk to anybody. You know what I mean? I'm happy to talk to people who wildly don't have my beliefs. In other cultures, I'll learn something. But I am not aware of any Cartesians I know of, professors or students or friends of mine are not Cartesians. That doesn't mean they hate everything he said. He doesn't really have a kicking camp. In fact, I don't even know many rationalists per se. It would be something like Kantian or Neo-Kantian or analytic. It would be something like the rationalism of today. We can call what we want, but these are historical labels that are not exactly applied, but that is the history and the ancestry of this. So, that said, what we have here, so So strangely, even though everyone possesses reason, Descartes found college confusing and education without a solid absolute foundations. Much like Russell will later, Descartes writes, considering that of all those who have hitherto sought truth in the scientists, the mathematicians alone have been able to find any demonstrations. Now that's interesting. Russell also says that math is the purest, real part of science. Now stop and think about that. What Descartes actually just said is God wouldn't lie to us about science, but it's only math which can prove anything purely in itself. That's what he says. Many are inclined to believe that. I'm just going to put your minds right there. And again, we're going to talk a lot about those sides to that. Yes, but it is interesting. Again, quantities. I am bringing this up again. I don't think quantities are necessarily of God or the devil. But why is it that quantities, and this is going to come up repeatedly, are the provable thing as opposed to anything else, kind of? That is strange, but that's very, of course, still continuing plenty. Why? What about our minds or brains or practices make that what it is or not? Or is it beyond practice, metaphysical or not? Purely rational or not? So, unlike Russell, who's an atheist, who's very Cartesian, but he hopes for science to wholly replace religion. Like a lot of pro folks, who would be more of these rationalist mind states today, who would not say, therefore, the Catholic Church is true, especially the Protestants and post-Protestant secular folks. And again, secular was different kinds of white Protestant guys can talk to each other without killing each other for a long time. So when conservatives are like, America was freedom for the white guy who's Christian, it's like, yeah, no, technically that is. It isn't anymore entirely, but then we get into the squabbles, of course. Descartes argues that mathematical reason proves God exists. What Descartes says is we can see math is absolutely real, right? Okay, therefore there must be a God, because otherwise where the heck would pure truth come from? He gives that argument. Many people who believe math, it's again, I argue with people all the time. People who believe all this are very adamant against religion, because I like, arguing with people sometimes, when we're nice. But again, this is not me, of course, taking sides entirely. This is me showing you the sides and talking through the history. Descartes says, I found that the existence of a being that was comprised of in the idea in the same way that the equality of its three angles to the two right angles of a triangle is composed is just so clearly perfect. The idea of God is so perfect and evident and so mathematical and adding up that I just have to believe it and cannot doubt it. Well, again, many who add up math today would not see it entirely and see him skipping a step or two, but I'm not going to chase him down. I'm neither the theist nor the atheist here. I'm going to let that hang where it is. It is, again, I am presenting you this because it is very interesting historically then to think where different camps come now, because again, conservative Christian evangelicals and then hard mathematicians who are even decidedly atheist, even if they're Platonic mathematicians who believe in pure math metaphysically, mentally, where is it? Is it a hologram that's purely straight-edged? That's rather square, man. It's a real cube, Of all occupations, we'll end out here, Descartes decided none is better than philosopher. I have to say, I agree with Descartes entirely. I'm getting the cat hair off my all too pristine collection of black t-shirts. Again, like Zizek and Judith Butler, I have a fine collection of black t-shirts. It is the uniform, again, of the philosopher. Descartes says, devoting my whole life to the culture of my reason is best, and that philosophy, like math, is sort of the pure, rational, reason-y side, of life. Making as much progress towards truth as possible. Perhaps wisdom also and truth. Perspective, not just positive truth, would be pointed out here. He says philosophy is a, quote, source of satisfaction so intense, I thought it's pure reason, but apparently it's passion as well, of the lower worlds, that a, quote, more perfect or more innocent, end quote, profession, one that does as little wrong in the world as possible, people say that's because philosophy does very little in the world, and politics is trying, cannot be enjoyed in this life other than in philosophy. He says, quote, I daily discovered truths that appeared to me of some great importance, and of which other men were generally ignorant. The gratification thence arising so occupied my mind that I was wholly indifferent to every other object. Notice the abstract facts in the math. other than the trees, which may be almost a bit Gnostic evil, according to Descartes. I don't have to pay attention to trees and objects and people. I have pure thought. The, quote, secret power of philosophers, Descartes says, is they realize that the only thing that we truly possess in command is our own minds and reason. That actually is because the spirit is the realm of freedom. This all down here in the body is total determination and math. So the only freedom, which isn't for cats and dogs if they're kind of robot automata beasts, freedom comes from the soul. And thus Christians have free will, notice, because they have a soul and a mind and aren't just clock bodies. That's also what he is saying here, which is in line with Catholic theology and doctrine and history and practices, He says it's the only thing that we have command freely over is our mind. And so those who are philosophers devote themselves entirely to this rather than any other objects, which sets us up a very math-based, rationalist-based, pure, abstract county token rather than actual object sort of rationalist orientation. All right, that said, that is a good hour on Descartes. I am going to follow up with Spinoza's interesting, Leibniz is really interesting, and we are going to be getting to, again, and within all of that, one of my favorites is Hume. I happen to like a lot. I happen to like Gopnik's Philosophical Baby. Gopnik and other philosophers often mention Hume and the Buddha, who is strangely a bit like Hume in British skeptical empiricism. So we're going to be getting to all of that in a talk 2 or 3, and then there will be more. And eventually we are going to walk it all the way out past Kant and Hegel, past Nietzsche, to Wittgenstein and postmodernism, in which they are going to be talking about this stuff, very much as I have been framing it. What can we say of this about reasoning and truth if there have been these sides of things, is the simplest way to say it. All right. Much love, everyone. Again, much love in your higher self rather than lower mechanical clock bodies. I will continue to believe that my cats are not mere machines. Yes, have soul, mind, look, reactions. Again, perhaps pure quantity clocks. Yes, but full of such love and fuzziness and kisses. I will not try to kiss the cat at this moment. Again, I will exercise freedom of will and my higher soul. So, that said, I will kiss the cat furry soul later. Much love, everyone. Much happiness. And I will see you if I ever see you.